you have questions about digital photography, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Photofocus. Here's your host, Scott Bourne.
Welcome to another edition of the original, the very first, the one and only Q&A podcast for photographers. It's Photofocus. And today we do have a guest host, thank God, and it's my good old buddy, Joe Frace. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Scott. It's really great to be here on this chilly day. There's lots of snow on the ground out here in Colorado, but the sun is shining and I'm feeling great. And it's been a while since we've been together, and I'm looking forward to today's podcast.
Glad to have you on the show. Also glad I'm in sunny, warm Las Vegas. Today's show is brought to you by Adorama. It is more than a camera store. If you want to buy something electronic, you can get it there at Adorama.com. All right, as is our custom, Joe, we're going to start out and let you take the first question. This one comes from David Rabineau in Webster Grove, Missouri. When I set exposure compensation on my Nikon D7000, what actually gets adjusted? Shutter speed? Aperture? ISO? I mean, something has to give, right? You are absolutely right, David. Something has to give. There's no magic, and we're going to get the answer from Mr. Joe Frace.
Yep, something has to give, but it actually varies depending on what camera mode you have set. For instance, if you're in aperture preferred, aka AV mode, then the shutter speed is going to vary. If you're in shutter priority or TV mode, then the aperture is going to vary. That's why when people talk about doing brackets for HDR, they want to make sure they're got their aperture set and let that shutter speed vary when they do basically what's a bracket. And that's what you do with exposure composition, doing kind of a variation on bracketing. Now, as far as ISO, there are a lot of cameras have an auto ISO setting, which sets the ISO for you depending on the situation. But my feeling is it always sets one way too high. So I never use that. Yeah, I know that's not the case for every camera, right?
That's right. There's a few of the older cameras, Joe, that in even exposure compensation mode, or those cameras that allow you to do exposure compensation in manual mode, where the ISO gets adjusted. The simple way to know how your camera reacts, we're talking about David's D7000 here, but every camera comes with a manual.
Production manual. That thing that we put back in the box.
Yeah.
We never see again as long as we live.
I would like for a camera manufacturer to offer a prize. Like, we didn't tell anybody this, but you get a free camera if you know the answer to this question, and it was contained on page 67, and you have to know it right now, and it's too bad. Anyway.
It's a cool idea. I love it.
The way you can know how this works on your specific camera is to read your specific manual. But in general, Joe, you nailed it. If you're in aperture mode, it's going to adjust the shutter speed. If you're in shutter speed mode, it's going to adjust the aperture, right?
Right.
Okay.
Now, can I ask your take on the auto ISO? It's my feeling that it seems like it always wants to select way too high of an ISO.
I will piggyback on this question with a discussion of this, because I do think there is one use for professionals for auto ISO, and only one.
And I'd love to hear it.
But for instance, on some of the newer high-end Canon and Nikon cameras, and maybe others, you can go in and set an auto ISO range.
Right.
Between minimum and maximum. And let's say you're using, the D3S. Well, that camera at ISO 6400 is spectacular. I mean, it sounds crazy, but at 6400 even, you can get spectacular shots. But let's just say you want to go a step better than spectacular and say, I don't want the ISO to go past 3200. You can say, I want an ISO range of 400 to 3200 and set that, and then use auto ISO. And here's where, for instance, in sports, wildlife photography, like bird photography, where they're moving quickly. Anytime you're photographing something outdoors that's moving quickly, let's say you're tracking on a subject in the shade, Joe, or let's reverse it. This is more likely to be where an auto ISO would come in. You're in full sunlight. You're on a Ross's goose at Bosque del Apache, New Mexico. He's flying across. You got a great shot, and then he crosses into shade. But he still has a nice background. You want to carry on. You don't have time to adjust your exposure because we're talking at 12 frames a second. This guy's gone in 2 seconds. The auto ISO saves you because it realizes, oh my God, it's gotten dark. I'm going to have to bump the ISO now so that we can keep that same shutter speed and that same aperture he was using. And that's where I advocate using it.
Have you tried it with race cars?
And it does work on race cars. Same thing.
No, I've never tried that, but now you got me wanting to try it.
Well, here's the scenario. Las Vegas Motor Speedway.
Wow, yeah.
In the afternoon, the sun starts to roll behind the big grandstand, and it puts a part of the track in shadow. Now, so if you got a car coming down out of turn 4 into the straight, in turn 4, it's in full sunlight. Into the straight, it's in full shadow. You don't have time when a car's moving 200 miles an hour to adjust anything.
No, that's right.
So
I'm going to give that a try. I've never tried it before, but it's...
that's the use for auto ISO. That's the only use for auto ISO for me. You know, you get wherever you think your camera's limits are and go ahead and set that. And by the way, just as a third piggyback, we're really taking into this question here.
I hope David appreciates the depth that we've given him here.
The third piggyback is, even if you're an amateur, you know, go ahead. Most of these cameras, even the $500 point and shoots today, will let you adjust your auto ISO range. So just in case you're one of those people that occasionally needs to shoot in program or auto mode, go ahead and set the maximum ISO that you want the camera to use. If you know the camera looks crappy after ISO 1250, then go ahead and make that the max. This may mean that you end up not getting some shots, but if the shots are going to be so horrible you couldn't use them anyway, who cares? So go ahead and set that max ISO on every camera you have, whether you're going to use this feature or not. That's my tip.
Sounds great.
All right, let's take another question from Kevin Banning in Newburgh, Indiana. What should I be concerned about when shooting in high humidity locations? We've actually taken this question 3 or 4 times before, but people keep asking it, so I know it's still a problem.
I didn't think it was that humid in Indiana, and I've actually been to Newburgh.
No, trust me, I grew up in Indiana. It's very humid in the summer. So do you want to handle this one, Joe?
We can talk about it. I live in a really low humidity area.
Right.
And so it's not something I run into very often. But when I lived in Maryland, and this was back, 30 years ago, we would run into it every now and then. The way I would handle it is I would bag it. Put the thing that causes the problems and fogging and stuff like that is the change in temperature. So you're in an air-conditioned house, you get in an air-conditioned car, you drive to an air-conditioned place, but you step outside and all of a sudden you're at a wedding, you're taking pictures outdoors, and you have this big jump and change in temperature and humidity. And that's what causes misting and fogging lenses internally and all that stuff. And some people would put them inside a sealed plastic bag and keep them and then still let it acclimate before they took it out of the bag. My friend Barry, who photographed Olympic athletes down at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, he had to shoot a guy in a sauna. And we talk about this in my book on available light photography that I did with Barry. And what he did was he put the camera in the sauna and for a while, 20 minutes or something like that, then went in, picked it up, and then started shooting. And that's the way he got fog-free pictures. But I don't really have any great tips on this one. Maybe you do.
Well, I think all your tips are fine, Joe. I mean, it's pretty simple. You want to keep the condensation off the camera. So the way you do that is the perfect example you gave. Put it in a plastic bag. The condensation, when you move from one temperature to another, where the humidity becomes a problem, forms on the bag, not the camera. And the reason this is a problem is that condensation, as moisture gets into the lens, it creates mold. And once it creates mold, then the lens is gone. So you want to keep the condensation off the camera. Now, you do also, once again, back to the manual, there are operating temperature guidelines and humidity guidelines in every camera manual. So read what they are. If you exceed,
and they're in the back of the book, and they're easy to find.
Exactly. And if you exceed those, don't expect to make a warranty claim, because that's one of the reasons that the companies put those in there. So do be careful about this, but it's pretty straightforward. Just use a plastic bag like Joe says. Let things have time to acclimate, and you're good to go. Let's take another question. This is from Scott with 1T in Cedarville, Ohio. I was shooting a high school football game recently in the middle of the afternoon. The opposing team, wearing all white, has a tendency to have their uniforms largely turn out as blown highlights with not a lot of detail, even on a slightly overcast day. I was wondering whether it's normal practice for professional sports shooters to use a neutral density filter to allow them to use a small f-stop for short depth of field and blurry backgrounds, but also slow the shutter speed so as not to blow out the highlights in uniforms. Okay, Scott, I think you've got a little misunderstanding going on.
Yes, there are a couple of things here.
Yeah, let's just talk about this simply. Now, shutter speed has nothing to do with blown out highlights. That's exposure. Now, shutter speed is a facet of exposure, but the way to avoid blown out highlights is to get the right exposure. Now,
yes, it's that simple, really.
It is that simple. Now, there's
another issue, but I'll let you go. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Well, I'll just say the issue is that, sometimes we have more latitude in the scene than the cameras are capable of recording. And the neutral density filter is going to make everything darker. I don't think that's the way to go. And I've never in my life, I've shot pro sports, and I know lots of pro sports shooters. I've never seen anyone use this method.
My life, never.
Yeah, I think the way to go is to understand that photography, and I've said this on dozens and dozens of these podcasts, photography is always, always, always about compromise. And the religion of blown out highlights, Joe, we've both talked about this.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
that's what you got.
If the detail in the face, which is pretty much what everybody's going to want to see on a football player, is good, let the highlights go if you got it. Because if you're going to worry about those highlights to the point that you muddy up the face, and I don't see anything but noise there when you try to bring it back with the shadow control, or you've done something else, you have picked the wrong compromise. I don't give a good golly what happens to the white football jersey. This religion of no blown highlights has gotten to a level of a religion, which means there's fanatics, Joe, and fanatics are almost always wrong because they see the world through a myopic, vision, and they don't get the big picture. If you're making a picture of a football player, we want to see his face. Nothing else matters.
There is one possibility, what he doesn't mention here is, are you using flash?
Now, yeah, but
because if he's using flash, here's what I want to say. Some fabrics use brighteners.
Yeah.
And they to make it look nice and white when they wash them. Mm-hmm. And that can fluoresce when it gets hit with flash.
That's true.
So there's always a possibility that he may be running into a little of that, and that's causing the overexposure in the uniforms. But there's no way around that one, And it's more likely to be happening in amateur sports than professional sports, where they want to make sure those uniforms look good on the TV camera. So that's a possibility. If he's not using flash, that would be the only extenuating circumstances I could think of.
Normally for sports, I do shoot high-quality JPEG, but in situations where there's high contrast, I will shoot in RAW, which will give you another stop.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that, but I'm glad you brought it up.
So shoot in RAW, that will help to some degree. At the end of the day, remember what's important. Remember, this is all about compromise. Get the face. That's what people want. Let everything else go where it has to go. And if you're living your photographic life under these religious rules that you can never do this or can never do that, then you're really
the 10 Commandments.
You're really missing out. Okay,
thou shalt not have blown out head highlights.
Before we move on, I want to say thanks to Animoto. They are sponsoring us this month again here at Photofocus, as they have for many months. And the reason I love working for them in helping them promote what they do, Joe, is that they supercharge my photos. You can take photos and now video and drop them into a little computer and send them to Animoto, and then their little magicians, actually their little computer programs, do things to make them animated and look cool. Now they do HD. It's just an amazing service. It's about $250 a year for the Pro model. It's free if you just want to play with it. Go to Animoto.com or click on the banner on the Photofocus.com page. You'll see my picture next to my Dodge Challenger there that says Animoto. And no, I didn't have that painted on there. That's just Photoshop. And that'll take you to their site. We appreciate their support. Let's take question number 4 from Jerry G. in Oak Hills, California. I recently read advice that image stabilization should be turned off even if the camera is handheld when using shutter speeds of 1,000th second or faster. Others say it makes no difference. As one beginning bird photographer to an experienced one, I think he's talking about me, which I have great respect and admiration for. Should I turn off the image stabilization function when using fast shutter speeds to capture images of birds in flight, or does it matter? Well, I'll take this one, Jerry, since you addressed it to me. Here's the bottom line. First of all, not all IS, VR, or OS is created equal. the older it is, the less effective it is. The newer it is, the more flexibility you have. Some of the newer ISs have horizontal tracking modes that allow you to continue to use the IS at fast shutter speeds. But for me personally, my experience has been, and I'm using each word I choose here very carefully, my experience has been that there's no real general benefit to the use of IS at 1,000th, certainly above 1,000th of a second, because it takes longer for the IS to stabilize the image, and therefore you miss some action.
Right.
So my advice is, I'll shoot at 1,000th of a second with IS on with a new lens that has horizontal tracking if I'm moving horizontally with a bird, but I won't shoot above that, and I'll generally turn it off at 1,000th of a second. So that's been my experience, and I have I've only used IS lenses with Canon and Nikon. I've never tried any of the Sigma OS. I'm assuming it works similarly, Joe.
Yeah, they all work a little different because to keep the lawyers from making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And
you stole my patent.
I've been really happy with the one with the Tamron on the 18-270. I forget they call it PV. I can't remember. I think that's what they call it. I can't remember. Everybody has their own little acronym too.
Right. But anyway, yeah.
But I also agree with you with cars because the thing will start settling down before it lets you make a picture, and that when you're shooting anything that's fast moving, you don't have time for that. You're dealing in microsecond decisions, and anything that slows that down, it can get in the way.
Yeah,
I find it better for stationary things. Like when I was in New Mexico and I was doing night photography, where things were moving,
right?
But it was really helpful when because I'm shooting like 1/8 of a second or something like that.
Yeah, I generally don't think you need it at 1,000th of a second. So you should do some experiments, Jerry G. That's the best thing to do, particularly when you get into these discussions on the camera forums, is ignore everybody and do your own test. See if the images are sharper with or without at 1,000th of a second. That's how you know. Try that. Okay, let's take a question from Larry in Huntington Beach, California, where I know it's not snowing. When discussing lenses, why do many photographers continue to feel compelled to add some version of which is equivalent to XXX when I'm using a 35mm camera? With rare exception, everyone's frame of reference is digital, so other than demonstrating you can do math in your head or old enough to actually have shot film, what's the point? I don't know what the point is, Larry. I mean, I don't put a lot of camera information on my photographs, and I think the effective focal length argument, which is one of the greatest ways to get pixel peepers to fire up and send me thousands of emails, is one that's a complete waste of time. It's the kind of thing photographers argue over, Joe. It's one of those religion things again.
Oh my God, we have the religious people out today.
Yeah, I don't think you need to worry about stating what the effective focal length of your lens is. You can simply say, now there are people, for instance, who do use full-frame sensors, me being one of them occasionally. So in that case, there is no crop factor. Put that in air quotes.
I hate that word. Crop factor.
That's why I prefer the phrase effective focal length. But you can simply say this was taken with a DX lens, that kind of thing.
I think that is leftover from when we were migrating from film to digital, and people were trying to educate everyone, and now we don't need it anymore. It's just like people who use DSLR. Okay, where are the new film SLRs? I don't think there are any film SLRs being made. So they're just SLRs. They're not DSLRs. We don't need new acronyms, and we don't need stuff like this anymore. We've moved on.
Yeah, personally, I understand your question, Jerry, but I don't have time to be that pedantic in any event. Larry. I boiled things down to, I put the picture up. I rarely put a lot of information about the picture because it's the picture that matters. It's not the process. Photographers get way too involved in the process. You need to start thinking about the picture. Okay. Alex Bolduc from Montreal. We are internationally beloved, Joe.
Yes, I love it.
Since you work on a MacBook Pro,
is that you?
I do.
I have one too.
So I think he means both of us. Have you made some tweak to speed up the process in Photoshop and other editing tools? Other than maximum RAM and SSD drive, I have a mid-2010 computer, so no Thunderbolt. Does a FireWire drive in a RAID mode, would that help to speed up the process? What do you think, Joe?
Jeez, I don't do that much serious editing on my MacBook. My MacBook Pro is used when I'm on the road, like I was last week in New Mexico, and I predominantly use Bridge when I'm on the road. And sometimes I'll go into Photoshop and poke around with it. But the big thing is, and I think you hit on it, was the maximum RAM. Put as much RAM as in there, and that's going to make as much different. But if you're using a MacBook, in a stationary situation in an office, it just seems to me working with that little monitor would make me crazy. That's the thing that bugs me the most. So,
well, I use a second monitor. I do work with a MacBook Pro in my office, but I plug into a big, beautiful Apple Cinema display. So that's my frame of reference.
So tell me about it.
It's I use the new Thunderbolt port and plug into the new LED cinema display, and it's beautiful and it's gorgeous and it's easy to calibrate and looks very good. I don't do any editing on my actual MacBook Pro, but to speed things up, I think you're right. The RAM always helps, and fast RAM. SSD drives are amazing in terms of launch, and I have one in my MacBook Pro, and I will never go back.
They're my wife's company just recalled all their Windows computers to replace their hard drives with SSDs, and she's like ecstatic.
Very fast. I think that the couple of things you can do is make sure that you have a second disk drive so that your Photoshop cache isn't running to the same drive that Photoshop is on. That often is a bugaboo. Sometimes merely trashing your preferences and starting over will speed up Photoshop. That's a common problem on Macs, particularly circa 2010. That doesn't take but a second. You can find those preferences in the Adobe folder. But I think Joe's right. RAM is the best thing you can do. The fastest CPU helps, but most of these things now have handed off to the GPU, Joe, the graphics processing unit. So buying a computer that has a fast GPU,
and it all goes back to what version of Photoshop are you using? There's so many variables in that question.
But I think the best thing you can do, other than what you already figured out, Alexandre, is to go ahead and make sure that Photoshop is not running on the same drive. And your question of does a FireWire drive in RAID mode help to speed things up? I don't think in RAID mode it helps to speed them up.
No, because it's going to have to write two files.
I think the opposite is true. I think you'd be better off using a FireWire drive direct and then setting your backup to RAID. So that's how I would do it. We appreciate the question. If you'd like to send in a question, just like Alex did from Montreal, all you have to do is use the email address, photofocus@me, that's M like Mary, E like Edward, me.com. We cannot guarantee we'll answer your question in the air. We get thousands of questions, but if it's pithy, and if you put your name in town, you'll increase your odds of getting the question answered. We try to answer questions we think will be beneficial to everybody. Remember, that's photofocus@me.com. And while you're at it, just hit the photofocus.com website. Every single day, 365 days a year, we publish free news and reviews you can use and how-to tutorials. Joe Ferrace here on the show constantly contributes. I put stuff in there. We have occasional other guest contributors. Tons and tons of free stuff there going back years. Thousands of articles. No reason not to visit photofocus.com. It's free. Always will be as long as I own it. Okay, let's take a question from Dave Calloway, the WIFC morning dude in Wisconsin. Hey, Dave. Shout out to Wisconsin cheeseheads. I currently load my pics into iPhoto. Then, if they need work, I send them to Aperture. Do you think there's any difference between storing pics in iPhoto or Aperture or even Lightroom when storing a ton of photos? Let me stop right there. Yes, I do. And I think your workflow, Dave, is unnecessarily impeded. That's the Aperture and iPhoto do many of the same things. Aperture is a much better cataloging tool than iPhoto. If there's some particular thing in iPhoto that you enjoy, you can always send a photo from Aperture to iPhoto, for instance, to make cards or whatever that you like to do it the way they do it in iPhoto, although I frankly have not used iPhoto myself in years. Aperture takes that role and does everything that iPhoto does and does it on steroids and offers you far more control. Now, Dave goes on to say iPhoto seems not to be very strong when it comes to handling large amounts of photos. Well, that's correct, Dave, because first of all, it takes the images in and reformats them and creates a separate copy of them. And, that is not what you want to have happen. Aperture reads the photo once. It creates what's called an EDL, an edit display list. It's just a little XML file. It's about 6 kilobytes of text. And then it doesn't make multiple copies of it from there. So I think if it were me, I would abandon iPhoto, move everything to Aperture, and have a nice day. Now, what do you think, Joe?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't use – my wife uses iPhoto a lot, but she doesn't have thousands of photos that she's just working with. And it suits with her the way she works. I don't use Aperture very much, but it seems to me everything you laid out just makes a whole lot of sense, just based on my limited time using both iPhoto and Aperture.
Well, I think iPhoto is a tremendous application for point-and-shoot photographers, amateurs, people who just want to get in, a few of their best images. But my Aperture libraries tend to run 100,000 images.
And you know what the thing is? The thing I noticed as a new Aperture user is that you can leverage everything you've learned from iPhoto to when you go to Aperture. Yeah. You're going to feel really comfortable there. So, why even bother?
Well, and there are a lot of Aperture resources. In fact, if you go to photofocus.com, underneath the all-top banner, you'll see a little link that says Learn Aperture 3 with Scott Bourne. That's my Creative Live Aperture class. You can buy that. You can get books. Aperture is not hard to learn. If you apply yourself, it actually starts to make a lot of sense. I would encourage those of you using iPhoto who are serious about your photography to consider moving to Aperture. It's now
isn't it cheap? It's really very affordable right now.
Oh, it's $59 or $99 or something like that from the Apple Store.
It's cheaper than Photoshop Elements.
It's cheaper than Elements. It's cheaper than Lightroom. It's cheaper than everything, and very easy to use. So I wouldn't store lots of pics, Dave, in iPhoto. Once you start to get to those kinds of problems, you want to have Aperture libraries. And here's a tip for you: have multiple Aperture libraries. I sort of cap my libraries at about 100,000 images. Technically, they can have as many as they want. But remember that Aperture is simply a database. And database calls, the more files there are to capture and remember, the more likely there could be an error. So I don't like to put more than 100,000 images in a library. I now am on my 5th Aperture library. It's almost full. I'll be starting my 6th Aperture library next year. Each of those is backed up to its own Aperture vault. And I feel very good about the safety of my images. So thanks for the question, Dave. We appreciate it. Wayne from Miami, Florida writes to photofocus@me.com and says, I recently went on a cruise for my vacation. While on board, I noticed the ship's photographers rarely looked at the back of their camera while taking photos of guests. Most had a stationary setup with lighting equipment and so on. However, I was impressed by their speed and confidence, even when walking around from guest to guest in various lighting conditions. What's their secret? I find myself checking my images constantly. Is it just the sheer amounts of photos they take? We all carry the same models of camera, Nikon D200, all were shooting manual only. Wayne in Miami, Florida asked that question. Joe, what do you think?
I think that these guys are like experienced wedding photographers who know that because, first of all, that's their boat. They know the lighting conditions. They're on it every day. They're shooting all the time. They know what they're going to get. All I can remember is, like back time memorial when when I started shooting weddings way back in the Jurassic period, I knew that a dancing shot was a F-16 shot, and I was 10 feet. I always had the camera 10 feet, F-16, move in, bang, and make a shot. So I think that's what they get to that point. Plus, also, they may be just plain bored of looking at these pictures, and it's like they've seen them 1,000 times, even though the people in them have only seen them once. So I think it's a combination of both their skills and adaptability and use of standard setups and lighting, along with the fact that, been there, done that.
Experience. You ever seen a musician play guitar and close his eyes? All the time,
yeah,
right?
They know where the strings are.
They know where the strings are because they practice. If you practice all day long, you get good enough, and these guys' practice is their job. I mean, they shoot all day long on the ship, and they know what they're doing, and they've got these constant lighting setups. So they do know that f5.6 at 1/25th of a second is going to get a great shot right here, because they do it all day. It's like walking across the room and flipping a light switch, Joe. You know when you do that, the lights are going to go on. You don't have to sit there and fret about it. Well, I wonder if the lights will come on if I flip the switch.
And I think the fact that they carry the same camera makes the other thing is that
they have a system.
They're not moving from camera to camera. And even I notice I have like 5 different Canons, and I only shoot Canon. None of the menus are the same.
Oh, I know. That's why I tell people, if you can afford it, your backup body should be the same as your main body. Because if you need it in a crunch, you're not going to know how to use it because you never use it.
I'll save money. I'll get a cheaper body, but then everything is different on it. So all these guys are using the same camera, so they know. Yeah. They know where everything is. They know where all the buttons and knobs are. They know what the menus are. I think that speeds the flow. And it's like you said, it's any kind of a professional musician or an artist or even an athlete. They make it look easy.
They do.
Because to them it is easy.
They practice. Okay, let's take a moment to thank the folks at Tenba. If you've seen me with my big orange Tenba messenger bag at any of the photo conferences or photo shows or exhibitions or workshops, you'll know that I've been carrying that thing for a lot longer than Tenba's been a sponsor of our show. It's one of my favorite bags. It's more of a briefcase kind of bag. If you need a backpack, there's other things you can use, but the messenger bag in general is my favorite for being able to carry a laptop and a couple of cameras or my shirts or whatever I got to do and just carry it on an airplane. It's tough as nails, and you should check it out by clicking the banner on the Photofocus.com site. Tenba Messenger Bags. We appreciate their support of the Photofocus podcast. Next question comes to us from Greg West. My lights are bright, too bright. And the lowest power setting, I find myself shooting at f11, even when using a beauty dish with a diffusion cover over it. My studio is 24 by 24 feet, and I could back the light away from the subject, but I want soft, diffuse lighting that a small distance provides. An ND filter on the camera will make it impossible to focus. Are there ND filters for lights themselves? Other solutions? What say you, Joe Ferrace?
I don't know of any ND filters, and I'm astonished. I assume he has strobes or electronic flash because he says that he has power settings and he's not dealing with hot lights, because sometimes hot lights can be bright and you can't control the output. But even I've tested a lot of different lights this year, from power pack and head systems to monolights, and from very low end lights like the Flashpoint from Adorama that are really cool lights for the money, up to really high end like the Broncolors. I could always dial them back enough to get way less than f11. So I can only wonder, what's your ISO, Greg?
Yeah, I think
400. You can dial your ISO back too.
I think Greg's got a problem. I think he's missing something, because I don't understand this either. I mean, unless these are like 25,000 watt lights, I don't understand.
Still.
Yeah, but there are a couple of things I will say. There are no ND filters made for the lights themselves. Although in the old days, and we're talking 50 years ago, they did make polarizers for lights.
Yes.
And I have a set of old Kodak polarizers, and they were used so you could photograph art, so there'd be no reflections. But another thing to do is just put lots of diffusers between. I mean, you can put that light right there 6 inches from the person at full power and just put 3 or 4 layers of diffusion between it. I guarantee you that will work. I guarantee it.
I guarantee that setting his ISO to 50 or 100.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think reading the manual is another thing here. I'd be interested, Wayne, to know if maybe you don't have some settings wrong, or your ISO isn't wrong. I mean, there's just I've tried like Joe. I've tried many lights. I just can't imagine why this is happening. But we need to move on. I hope that helps. Let us know if it doesn't. James Gates in Carlton, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, writes to say, I have a Canon 5D Mark II. I was told by a photographer mentoring me a couple of years ago to adjust the color tones graph in the menu, red, green, magenta, yellow. Does that affect raw files in any way? If not, should I even worry about that? Or changing the contrast, saturation, etc. in the picture styles menu when shooting raw? If
you're the king, you're the king of RAW, but changing anything isn't going to affect RAW.
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, there's no reason in the world to make these changes if you're shooting RAW, because you can do all that in post.
That's why you're shooting RAW.
That's why you're shooting RAW. And I've owned every Canon camera that's ever been made, just about, and I've never changed any of these things. And nobody's saying, well, we're not buying your pictures because you didn't change the color tones graph, Mr. Bourne.
Well, I do play with the picture styles menu, but the way I get around that is, first of all, picture styles doesn't affect RAW files.
That's for JPEG.
It only affects JPEGs.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll shoot RAW plus JPEG, so I can get a JPEG file that has the picture style on it and the untouched RAW file. But
yeah,
since he's mostly talking about RAW, I'm as confused as ND.
James, I'm sure your mentor meant well, but perhaps you misunderstood him. If you're shooting RAW, you do not need to make these adjustments. If you are shooting in JPEG, then they matter. But I shot all my cameras the way they come from the factory for decades, never had any issues. So I wouldn't again, this is a little bit pedantic. I would spend way more time figuring out how to see well, how to chase light, how to interact with my subjects, how to have great vision as an artist, and zero amount of time on color tones graphs. So that's
zero. I agree.
Hey, you know what? You can go to borrowlenses.com and get cameras and lenses. Most of you probably figured that out by the name, borrowlenses.com. But you can also get video gear, tripods. I think they've got just about everything that's photographically related, and just about every lens you can buy. They even got Leicas for rent. They got a Red for rent. They got everything.
Oh.
Yeah, you can rent a Red camera if you're shooting high-end video. You can rent anything you want from borrowlenses.com. You don't need a camera store where you live. And if you happen to be here in Vegas, you can even pick it up at they have an outlet where you can pick it up right there in a camera store, or they'll just ship it to you. Just click on that borrowlenses.com banner on the Photofocus page. You'll learn more about it. We appreciate their support of the show and the Photofocus website. All right, let's take Matt Holliday's question. He's from St. Louis, Missouri. He says, I'm trying to get used to focusing my camera in low light. Can you share any tips for improving autofocus in low light? Joe?
Fast lenses?
Fast lenses, I agree.
One of the things that, watch where you put your selection point. Most of the time you can move that thing around. A lot of people don't change it, and they wind up getting like whatever it is, from 9 to 46 or whatever focusing points, and that can slow it down. So you're much better off picking one point, and that point, place it where the person or subject is most important to you. And I think that'll improve it a lot faster, because all of a sudden now your autofocus only has to look one place.
I got 2 quick tips that'll help. Here they are. Look for an area of high contrast on the same focal plane, where white meets black. That will be easier for the camera to find in low light.
Thank you. I forgot that.
Secondly, and my best tip, my best secret weapon, the $1.99 LED flashlight that you can buy at
I was going to say that, but I thought that sounded too lame. But
no, I use it all the time. Point that sucker right there at the subject, and your autofocus will grab right on. Keep your finger halfway down so you don't lose it. Then recompose if you need to and make the shot. Works every single time. So $1.99 investment, you got your improved autofocus. And also, just for kicks, I got to thinking about Matt's question, Joe. Go into your custom functions menu, because some people don't realize that a lot of these cameras come with an autofocus assist light that sends out a beam to help the autofocus in low light, and they've got it turned off in their custom functions. So turn that puppy back on, and that will help. That's another possibility. So we covered several bases there. I'm pretty sure we got that one.
Yeah.
It's always good to get one.
That was very concise, too.
Yeah, that's what we need, because we're running out of time.
Oh.
We spent way too long piggybacking on question number one.
I'm sorry.
It's my fault, too. I did it. Tom Jackson from Brooklyn, New York says, I noticed that on all of the camera forums, the first question most photographers ask about a new camera is, how well does it do in low light? Well, when I shot film, we never talked about things like this. What's changed? Oh, don't get me started, Tommy. Do not get me started.
Well,
it's the religion.
Knew what the film was, Oh, yeah. Obviously, it's another religion question, but
the religion of low light.
When we shot film, we all knew what happened when we shot, high-speed Ektachrome. We knew what it would do. Now all the cameras are different. It's like you have 27,000 different versions of high-speed Ektachrome, and all the cameras handle it differently, and also it's something to talk about, I think.
Well,
but over time, it's like these cameras continue to improve the low light performance, and there has never been a high speed film ever made that is as good as the current crop of SLRs at high speed.
Here's the thing. If you look at the old copies, and I wish people in our audience would do this, Joe. You and I have done this. I wish people would look at old copies of Life and Look magazine.
And see how grainy the pictures are.
And these are the pictures that were published by Pulitzer Prize-winning photographers of the day. These are pictures of the most important people, places, and things of the day. These are iconic photographs that will live in history. And yes, there's a little bit of grain in there. Oh my God, dogs and cats living together. That'll be next.
I love it. Ghostbusters reference.
Yeah, let's just do this, folks. Let's just get away from all these religions. The low light religion is one. Who cares? If there's a little bit of noise, you can fix it in post, number one. But I'll tell you this right now. Any $500 DSLR, or SLR as Joe says, will produce better quality in this regard than any film we had available through, 1980, 1990. Anything you can buy today, the cheapest stuff you can buy is better at this than most things. If you want to take pictures at night in the dark, then think about getting a lantern. I don't know. It's just I think that low light.
Just get a tripod and set it at ISO 100, and you get some great pictures. Yeah. Because there's no reciprocity failure with digital.
Exactly, which is a bad thing if you're in the slot canyons, but that's another story. You get those purple slot canyons because of the reciprocity failure. I do think that people are way too concerned about this, Joe, and I'm sort of making light of it, and I apologize if I went too far. But the bottom line is, this again, spend time thinking about how to make people comfortable in front of your camera. Spend time about finding good subjects in great light. Spend time trying to tell stories with your photography. Focusing on things like color tone maps and low noise performance. It's, I understand the need for that, and believe me, I'm concerned about it too, but it's probably like on a list of 100 things, it's down there around 98 that I'm concerned about. So I think that the reason people are talking about it is because they've been told or taught, Joe, that that's something to think about.
Yes, there are many, many forums and websites that they just go on and on and on about it. It's the quest for perfection.
Yes, it is. Question number 13 from Van Roberts, Toronto, Ontario. Again, oh, Canada. Do you think that the new Lytro field cameras will take off? Won't we actually have to become experts at post-processing to take advantage of this technology? Have you seen any of these things, Joe?
Here's my take. It's a cure for no known disease.
Okay.
But I'd be interested to know what you think.
Well, I think this everyone's acting like this is new technology. It's been around a long time. This is just an application of it. I do think it's interesting. It's probably fun at the moment for the low end point and shoot kind of person, because that's what these cameras that are coming to market are. They're low-end point-and-shoot quality. I do wonder if Grandma is going to sit there and learn how to use the Lytro software to move the focus point around. I don't see that happening myself. I mean, she's mad because she can't get her iPhone to work. Yeah. I think that people do need to think about the post-production part of this. Now, I don't have the experience yet with it, and I've been trying to keep an open mind. I have had some dialogue with the company. I am supposed to get an opportunity to talk with them more about this, and when I do, I might have more information on this. At this point in time, I'm taking a wait-and-see attitude. So that's what we'll do. Hey, we want to mention SmugMug, professional photo sharing, before we go. That's where we host all the video, for instance, here at Photofocus. Most people don't know that SmugMug is got probably the best video hosting on the web. It's higher quality than any of the competitors, in my opinion, and the terms of service don't bother me a bit. If you need to host video, SmugMug will do that. If you need to sell photos, SmugMug will do that. If you need to just show gallery, SmugMug will do that. Click on the SmugMug banner on the Photofocus.com homepage, and you'll get more information thanks to SmugMug. Let's take 2 more questions here. Simple question from Sam James, Los Angeles, California. How much money should I expect to spend to get a new camera if I'm hoping to get professional or nearly professional results?
$500.
$500. I agree. anything from $500 on, you're going to get image quality that will be publishable anywhere in the world. And yeah, sometimes it's nice to have the $5,000 cameras. I own them, but I've proven time and again. I took the Nikon P7000 when it was brand new out to Grand Canyon, sold 3 photos from that $499 point-and-shoot camera to a magazine. So there you go.
And that number keeps changing. If you asked us a year ago, we might have said $800.
Yeah, I bet in the next year or two we'll get down around $400.
It's very possible and likely.
Okay, last question here on the Photofocus podcast. Let's see, this is from Blue Holden, and Blue is in London, United Kingdom.
Wow.
My local camera store sells cameras at retail price. Am I out of line trying to haggle with them, or should I just give up and order online? I would haggle. That's me.
What do you got to lose?
What are they going to do, shoot you?
Yeah. They'll say, no, we can't do that. Say, okay, that's fine.
They can't kill you for asking.
Don't be bashful, Blue.
Yeah, and I'll tell you right now, I mean, in this economy, people who will not negotiate with you, who won't work on your particular issues, don't deserve your business. So I would go in and say, look, can you help me a little bit? This online resource is selling this camera for $200 less than you. Can you meet me in the middle? Because, I mean, you do want to support your local camera stores if you can.
Sure, if you got them. If you're lucky enough to have one.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to still have one, you do want to show support, particularly if it's a good one like Picture Line in Salt Lake City, where they are constantly doing things to help the community. I would do everything in my power. If it was a couple of bucks more, I'm happy to give it to them. But if they're way, way off, there's a camera store in San Jose, California that's very famous. It has 2 words in the name. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to promote them. But I went in there one time, and they were selling products at above MSRP, and I merely asked why so much, and the guy threw a temper tantrum like a 13-year-old girl being stood up for the prom, went behind the counter, literally looked at his shoes and folded his arms as if I was not there. And I accordingly will not be back to that store ever again. So, ask for the discount. If they don't want to give it to you, decide whether or not it's worth dealing with them and supporting them. And if not, go ahead and buy online. I mean, we recommend Adorama. And I can tell you straight up that I don't have any problem going to them. They've always been good to me. They have good prices, sometimes the best prices, always competitive prices. And chances are they have better access to the cameras than your local store. But I do believe in supporting local stores. If you can, they've got to give you a reason to. So that's it. Well, that's all the time we have, Joe, for this episode of Photofocus.
It just flew right by.
It did, and I'm so grateful you coming, because the last 3 shows I've had to carry by myself. And
I'm sorry.
People get antsy when they get nothing but me, because I guess I'm boring. I don't know. Anyway,
well, keep me in mind for next time.
We'll try to get you on again soon. Where can people find you when you're not doing Photofocus?
Well, they can find me on Twitter at Joe Farace, all one word, or they can bop on by my website, joefarace.com, and there's a link there. They can send me emails if they have any questions or follow-ups.
All right. And, of course, you can find me on Twitter at Scott Bourne, all one word, SCOTTBOURNE. And if you're thinking of becoming a professional photographer, I do want to briefly mention my new book with Skip Cohen is out and available in bookstores, Barnes & Noble, I guess, being the last bookstore left, and then on Amazon. It's called Going Pro. Check that out if you're interested in turning pro. We appreciate you listening to the Photofocus podcast. We are here on the 5th, the 15th, and the 25th of each and every month. And remember what I always say when I leave you. Go out there and make pictures. Don't just take pictures. We'll see you on the next episode of Photofocus.